And welcome to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show, available on Pacifica Radio Network and Progressive Radio Network and iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud and at opednews.com/podcasts. My guest for this show is a return guest. This is the third time Douglas Rushkoff is going to be on the show. He's a media theorist, a writer, a columnist, a lecturer, and graphic novelist. He's known for coining terms and concepts, including viral media, digital native, and social currency. He's written 10 books on media technology and culture. He wrote the first syndicated column on cyber culture for the New York Times, as well as done regular columns for The Guardian. He's currently professor of media theory and digital economics at the City University in New York. And he's got a new book out, Team Human. I love this book. Great book. And you know, watching you talk about it, I get the feeling that you're feeling really good about it, and maybe with more enthusiasm than I've seen from you in other books.
I mean, maybe. I guess, I mean, in some ways it feels like a book that people might actually read. You know, I feel like most of the books I've written, I guess partly because there's research in them and footnotes and lots of stories and case studies and examples, that the book exists more as proof that I'm allowed to come and talk about something authoritatively. But this book is I mean, I wrote it to be an experience, you know, to be a literary experience for a reader, you know, and for a modern reader. So I guess I feel more confident going out with this to say, yes, you know, 20-something, 30-something, or 40-something person who has very little time and doesn't like reading books because we're all on the internet now. Here is an experience for you that's as powerful as a you know, some kind of a psychedelic trip or a vision quest. And it's available, you know, a way to reify your connection with what it means to be human in a very disorienting moment. So I really look at it as finally writing a book that helps people kind of reprogram themselves. It's, you know, it's really meant as a system reboot for people. To see the world differently rather than some book about something. You know, the book is about the reader's experience of going through this and then kind of recalibrating so they can face this world with coherence and compassion rather than fear and confusion.
Absolutely. And that's why I love the book. You know, I call the show The Bottom Up Show. I've been doing it for 11 years. My book came out last month, The Bottom Up Revolution, which you were kind enough to give a blurb for. And I think we're talking about a lot of the same things, that we are human, that humans evolved over a really long time to be connected to each other. And I think that's one of the core messages of your book. I want to just read a couple of brief excerpts from the beginning of the book to give people a flavor for it. You say there's a reason for our current predicament, an anti-human agenda embedded in our technology, our markets, and our major cultural institutions, from education and religion to civics and media. The first step towards reversing our predicament is to recognize that being human is a team sport. We cannot be fully human alone. I love that idea. Our most advanced technologies are not enhancing our connectivity, but thwarting it. They are replacing and devaluing our humanity. This has been by design. Engineers at our leading tech firms and universities tend to see human beings as the problem and technology as the solution. Human beings evolved by gaining the capacity to forge greater numbers of social connections. The development of our brain, language, text, media, and digital networks were all driven by our need for higher levels of social organization. So that's, I think, the beginning of your message. But I kind of wanted you to begin by telling a story. You got a story you can tell us that kind of ties this together?
I mean, well, I got the story of humans. I mean, one story. I mean, I guess a lot of people have heard this story already, but one story is I got invited to do a talk about the digital future for what I thought was going to be, a room filled with bankers, and it turned out to be 5 tech and hedge fund billionaires who wanted advice on where to put their bunkers. Then they were thinking about their bunkers after the event, the electromagnetic pulse or climate change or social unrest that makes life as we know it impossible. And what I realized was that these folks, the wealthiest, most powerful people in the world, saw themselves as utterly powerless to change the future, that the best they could do was hang on and prepare for the inevitable collapse. And it made me realize that they've been using a kind of an insulation equation, really, to gauge their success. That what they're trying to do, and I guess people have been trying to do this for the last few hundred years, is earn enough money to insulate themselves from the reality that they're creating by earning money in that way. So it's as if they're trying to drive a car that can drive fast enough to escape the fumes of its own exhaust, without realizing that the world is small and eventually they're going to come back around the other side of the planet and be smack in the middle of the problem. And the myth that they've accepted is that nature is some battle for survival between competing individuals, and they've used, I mean, partly cynically, the kind of libertarian extremists have used Darwin as this excuse that, well, that's what evolution is. It's individuals competing. But if you go back and you read the Darwin, what you see is page after page, this guy is amazed at the collaboration and cooperation between species. That what Darwin's Origin of Species is really about is the way that individuals and groups collaborate in order to ensure mutual survival. All the dances that animals do to avoid fighting, to figure out who would win this fight if we were to fight it, so that I don't have to lose an eye just to prove that I could kill you, and both go on to to live another healthier day. And what it made me see is that if human beings are the most evolved species, it's really just a reflection of our ability to collaborate, to work together, and to form communities of sharing. And each of our technologies and media that we develop, from language and text right through the printing press and radio and the internet, originally they are created to allow us to collaborate in more complicated ways, but for one reason or another, and I look at a lot of those in this book, they turn against that original purpose, and they end up promoting, isolation and power grabbing and monopolization rather than more coordination.
And you attribute part of that to capitalism and to technology development.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of went hand in hand. I think it's important, and it's the interesting thing, and I wrote some other books about this, but, I spoke with everybody from, the biggest bankers and economists in the world to, chairman or attorney, or certainly deputy chairman of the Federal Reserve, and none of these people understand where money came from. They accept the rules of central currency, of this interest-bearing central currency, as if those were the rules of economics. And they're not. I went back and did the history and found that, oh, look, in the late Middle Ages, there was the beginnings of the kind of peer-to-peer society we talked about in the early internet days. The soldiers had come back from the Crusades. They had opened up trade routes, and they borrowed a lot of interesting mechanisms from the Moors. And one of them was the bazaar, or what we called the market, and it allowed people to do all of this trading they hadn't done before. Instead of just being peasants working for vassals or lords, now they were sort of entrepreneurs, small business people, bringing their goods and wares to the market and trading it using these very low cost, really temporary currencies that worked more like poker chips, these kind of currencies that expired at the end of the day that were just used to prime the market and allow for trade, like chits. And the problem was, as the former peasants got wealthy, the aristocracy got poor. They were getting relatively less control. So they made these rules. They invented an economic operating system to prevent this rise of the peasant class. And they came up with two things: the chartered monopoly, which is what we now consider the corporation, and the other one they came up with was central currency, which said that nobody is allowed to transact unless they borrow money from a central treasury at interest and pay it back to one of these lords who isn't even working. And, 400 or 500 years later, we accept those rules as given conditions of nature. And the poor kids who are developing new, brilliant, wonderful social media technologies and platforms, they don't understand that there's another operating system beneath the code that they're using. And that one is the one that tells them to go to a venture capitalist and get $1 zillion and get an IPO and surrender your company to the needs of shareholders rather than the needs of your users. And these companies, they end up building technologies that don't serve us. That's how we got the surveillance extractive economy that we're living in, is that these companies needed to pivot away from enabling social coordination and towards the extraction of data and value from everybody.
That's an indictment of corporatism.
It is. I mean, and corporatism served certain people for a certain amount of time. We have to admit that the slavery of many people and the eradication of indigenous civilizations notwithstanding, corporatism did lead to expansion and factories and technologies and many wonderful things, along with the genocides and and wars. But now that we see, hopefully, now that we recognize the downside, now that even wealthy white people in America are experiencing what it is like to be colonized, now we know, whether it's that we've experienced, the devastation that a Walmart can have on our town, or that an Uber or an Amazon can have on our industry, or that a Facebook or a Google can have on our very psyche. When we feel our own consciousness being colonized by algorithms, we understand, this is a very soft version of what all those indigenous people experienced when our corporations went and took over their land or took over their lifestyles or their occupations.
Talk a little bit more about algorithmic colonization.
Well, you think about what's the actual function of Facebook? What is it there to do? We think maybe it's there to help us make friendships or something, but no, what we now know Facebook is for is to use data that we leave behind, use our past behaviors to put us into a statistical bucket, to figure out a kind of a statistic algorithmically derived consumer profile, and then fill our news feeds with things based on what they know about us. So if they know through their profiling that there's a 80% accuracy of you going on a diet in the next month because you're maybe they can tell that you're worried about your health, what they're going to do is start filling your news feed with stories and warnings about, getting too fat or cancerous products or things that are dangerous for you. And they're not just doing it to sell the products of a particular sponsor. What they're doing it for is to get you to behave more consistently with your profile. They don't want you to be one of those 20% of people who was going to do something else. They want to get the 80% accuracy of their algorithm up to 85 or 90 or 95%. And they don't do that by training the algorithm better. They do that by training the human beings to behave consistently with the profile, to shave off those weird edges, to get rid of that 20% of people who are engaging in anomalous, unpredictable behavior. It's really the auto-tuning of humanity away from the weird notes and onto the notes that they can that they can monetize. And
But
that's a really dangerous thing to do.
What would you say is, what is colonization? I think that's a really important concept we're talking about here. What is it? What did it mean for Native Americans? What does it mean for us?
Well, I mean, Native Americans, interestingly enough, had such a humanistic, genuinely humanistic view of people that they didn't even blame the conquistadors for what was happening to them. When they saw these Europeans come in and start clear-cutting forests and killing everything unnecessarily and enslaving and killing people, they couldn't imagine that these were just evil people. They couldn't imagine that human beings, under any normal circumstance, would even do things like that. So they decided that we had a disease. They said that we must have a disease. They called it wetico, and it was a spiritual disease. Where human beings act against their own nature and destroy things. Which is kind of interesting, that the compassion they had for us, even with what we, and I guess it wasn't me, but with the Western European ancestors were doing to them. And now it's funny, in Team Human, I call it cyber wetico. We're doing wetico on ourselves, in that we are colonizing really the surface area of our own attention. That we've run out of physical territory to colonize. So as we move into an attention economy, we're colonizing human time. So the time that you might have spent with your child or with a loved one is now spent online or using text or using one of the many social media apps. We see kids, instead of talking with one another, they're sitting in the same car or on the same bench, Snapchatting at each other. It's like, well, wait a minute. What's happened is that their relationship has been colonized by an app, so that the app can extract data from that exchange and then further manipulate the kids. So it's a matter of keeping people online on their devices, clicking and providing data at every moment. And some of the more progressive people, and I appreciate their perspective. Folks like Jaron Lanier are arguing, well, if these companies are extracting value from all of the data that we're producing, then let's just figure out a way for us to keep some of that value. So how can, if the Serta mattress company, say, can make money by finding out which side of the bed we got out of on any particular morning, then we could make, micro cents every time we get out of bed. But you think about that world where now you're trying to optimize the value of the data you're creating by whether you're getting out of bed on the right side or the left side, or how you open a door, or what the choices you make about when you breathe. You're going to be looking for, how do I maximize the data value of everything I'm doing? That means interact with more people per day rather than less. But the more people you interact with, well, then the less depth of interaction you're going to have with any one of them. All of the kinds of experiences that human beings have that actually create value for us, that create depth of experience or understanding, or dare I even use words like this in modern times, but have a sacred sense about them, something more profound than maybe we understand it in the market or readily in utilitarian science. Those sorts of things go away, right? The time that you spend just embracing your child is off the books. It's off the books. It's not creating value. So that's going to be discouraged. And don't think of this as a weird conspiracy theory. This is just reality. There's a division at Stanford in computer science called captology, run by a guy named B.J. Fogg. This is one of the most important series of courses you're going to go through if you go to Stanford and to become a computer developer. And captology is the study of how to, like the word says, captivate human beings with digital technology and then change their behavior. It's behavioral design theory. And what they do is take everything we know about behavioral economics, which is sort of the psychological proclivities of human behavior, and how do we apply that to digital spaces in order to get people to do stuff that they wouldn't normally do.
Now, you're saying that what we need is not a revolution, but a renaissance. And I like your concept of revolution as a Ferris wheel. Can you describe that and then talk about renaissance?
Yeah. I mean, revolutions are great and all, when you're being oppressed. But for the most part, revolutions, as the word even suggests, they're circles. So these ones are on the bottom, then these ones come up and get rid of those ones, and now they run things, and then there's that sort of inevitable cycle of corruption by whoever seems to be in charge. And what we've really seen in the last couple of centuries is this series of revolutions that don't ultimately take us anywhere. You just get, whoever's kind of the biggest, baddest guy on this side or that side ends up running things. We don't want we don't want a dictator from either end of the spectrum, because they're just you end up in the same situation, the same set of oppressions. Where what I'm looking at is the possibility of renaissance. And
okay,
renaissance.
Now wait. We need to do a brief station ID, and then we'll get into renaissance. Okay. Pause for 10 seconds. I'll throw in the bumper, and then we can do it. You're listening to The Bottom Up Show. My guest is Douglas Rushkoff. He's a media theorist, writer, columnist, lecturer, author of 10 books, currently professor of media theory and digital economics at the City University in New York. And he has a new book out, Team Human. You're going to tell us about Renaissance now.
Yeah, I mean, a renaissance is really just the rebirth of old ideas in a new context. That's what renaissance, to rebirth. And it's really a different idea. It's not about eradicating what is, and just utterly replacing it, but it's about retrieving things from the past and bringing them forward into this new time, the things that were lost and left behind. So a lot of times, because I talk a lot about the sort of the economic models of the late medievalism, folks at the Wall Street Journal or Financial Times will say, "Oh, Rushkoff, he just wants to bring us back to the Middle Ages," and we all know that wasn't a good time. And no, I'm not asking that we go back to the Middle Ages at all, but that we retrieve the economic mechanisms that were forcibly repressed in early capitalism, that were forcibly repressed by the monarchs of the last Renaissance. If we want to have a new Renaissance, then the beauty of it is we get to retrieve the things that were lost in the last Renaissance. So the last Renaissance was about the retrieval of Greek and Roman values, centralization, and the power of the state, and clean lines and a certain kind of reductionist science. And what was left behind was late medievalism, was crafts and weirdness and localism and local currencies and the local marketplace and many regenerative understandings of nature and herbalism and naturopathy and all sorts of things that were lost in the quest towards technology and industrialism and reductionist science and cause and effect thinking and as Francis Bacon would argue, the subjugation of nature to man, which was a great idea to subject.
You talk about Bacon, and you basically describe him as not only subjugating, but raping nature.
Well, that's the language that he used.
For
That we can
science.
hold down nature, hold her down by the hair, and dominate her, and take her. And I understand, because they were scared of nature. They were scared of women too, obviously. But, that's really run its course. We've paved over enough of nature, and we've gotten to the place, even real scientists are at the place to say, oh, there's some things about nature we really don't understand. And maybe we shouldn't just try to reduce nature to this monoculture. We shouldn't do agriculture by just committing one field to one crop forever, because the soil dies. Because it turns out, as we weren't recognizing, that soil is alive. Soil's not just dirt. It's really complicated. That nature is complex, not just complicated, and complex in ways that we can't fully understand. We can't just reduce with chemicals. That the sort of the Monsanto solution to agriculture ends up reducing its complexity to the point where we realize, oh my gosh, that bacteria we actually needed, or those organisms in that soil matrix are not just junk. It's back to collaborative nature. That it turns out trees
your riff on trees and mycelium. Tell us that.
Right. And this we know. It's in a book called The Secret Life of Trees. All the science for this, that trees are not competing. When I was in middle school, they taught us that trees were competing for sunlight, and that the bigger tree would get the sunlight and then the little one would wither. Turns out that's not true at all. The trees that are getting the sunlight in one season, they're sharing the nutrients with the trees that they're shading. They share them with their roots through mycelium, mushrooms under the ground, to the smaller trees. Then when the big trees lose their leaves in the winter, the little trees, which are the evergreens, they end up sharing the nutrients back through the mushrooms back with the big trees. And then the mushrooms get a service fee for having transported all these nutrients back and forth. So it's like, what is that? It's like, oh my gosh, no, it's this big, weird, collaborative matrix. So in our Renaissance, what we get to do is retrieve all of the sciences and awarenesses that were more holistic and less broken down. That rather than science, as the word suggests, science is dividing things into its parts to understand them, we start getting more of a science of holism and a production that involves regeneration rather than extraction.
And you say in your book, our Renaissance potentially brings us from a world of objects to one of connections and patterns. The world can be understood as a fractal where each piece reflects the whole.
Right. And it's really just increasing our dimensional understanding of the world. If you look at the sort of the highlight of the original Renaissance was perspective painting. It was the ability to depict three dimensions on a two-dimensional plane, and people came to understand 3D. It was when we circumnavigated the globe and understood that the world was not flat, but it was round. And in our Renaissance, what did we do? We didn't circumnavigate the globe. We orbited the globe. We took a picture of the planet from space and came to understand ourselves as, oh, wow, this is a living organism. We got the Gaia hypothesis. And instead of perspective painting, we got the holograph and the fractal, which shows that the whole is somehow reflected in each part of that whole. And these are modern, these are our understandings of the world much closer to chaos math and quantum physics than Euclidean geometry or the more the basic mechanistic sciences. And they don't have to be weird and new age and strange, although they can be. It's a world where we become capable of contending with uncertainty, with open-endedness. It's, who can watch a David Lynch movie and not understand what it was really about and see that there's no conclusive ending and still experience that as pleasure, as an opening? Those are the people who are going to thrive in this more, complex world that we're moving into.
And this science model, it's actually the new modern science. It's the one that we have now, because the old linear mechanistic one didn't work to explain quantum physics and subatomic particles or complex ecosystems. So it's not only not weird, it's necessary. It's the future.
Yeah, I mean, and it's you know it's but on a metaphorical level as well, though, it's what will lead to kinds of more practical, sustainable solutions. People who understand, sort of life, living sciences in this way, circular pattern recognition and regenerative patterns in living systems and physical systems, are going to be much more capable of understanding something like energy as something that's regenerative rather than something that has to always cost us. These are going to be the scientists and engineers that come up with solutions where, rather than, which is what's happening now, people accepting given circumstances of 20th century science and economics and thinking that the best you can do is extract as much as you can for yourself and then build walls in order to protect yourself.
Now,
so whether it's the president building walls to keep out, brown people from the South, or individual billionaires building bunkers to keep out the throngs once the crisis hits, this is a very short-sighted, 20th century and earlier way of understanding the world as a zero-sum game of competition between individuals, rather than, what I say in the book, that being human is a team sport, that we're all in this thing together.
Now, in prepping for our interview, I listened to a couple of your talks and conversations, and you've told that story about you getting in the green room with those 5 billionaires who are worried about where to end up living. And the other two of the pieces you left out, telling it today, is they're worried about being in a place where money doesn't matter anymore, and they've got all their guards, and they ask you the question, how do they keep the guards loyal and protecting them? And I love your answer.
It's funny. Yeah. They were asking me, how do we maintain control of our security force after our cash is worthless? So why wouldn't these folks, if they have the guns and the power, why wouldn't they just take the bunker from the billionaire? So they were really asking me about, should they get some kind of robots or shock collars, or maybe a combination on a safe that only they know? And so, no, none of those are going to work. I said, I was kind of joking, but I said, well, why don't you just pay for their kids' bar mitzvahs now? I mean, not that many of these people, I don't know if they're Jewish, whatever, but my idea was, I mean, if you're a security guard in a post-apocalyptic world, and the guy who you're working for is someone who paid for your kid's bar mitzvah, you're going to be much less likely to whack that guy in the back of the head because he was good to you when he could be. So I was saying, look, treat these people well now. I mean, and then maybe you won't even have an apocalypse to prepare for. If they looked at the rest of humanity as their partners, that's the one sort of tiny crack of hope I have, is that if they realized at least they're going to need 50 guards to protect them, then that means they understand that they're going to be depending on other human beings. And they are trying to imagine, wow, why will these people be nice to me if I don't have money to hold over them? If I don't control the cash?
In the world of Team Human, the way you build equity is with kindness and heart.
Right. Or I mean, and it's funny, even scientists, they keep calling it, reciprocal altruism, as if the only reason that you would run to save someone else's baby who's about to get run over by a bus is because you're hoping that person would do it for your baby. And I think that's wrong. I think you run and do it because you have compassion for that baby too. Even though it's not your baby, you're still going to risk your life to run out and save it. Not because you're making an economic calculation that, well, I'm hoping that baby, that baby's mother would go run and rescue my baby. It's like, no, it's not. And once you start behaving from the place, it's such a more natural place to behave out of kindness. It's so much more real. It's funny. I wrote a book called Life Inc. way back when, in like 2006 and 2007, when I was warning about the coming mortgage crisis. And nobody believed me, so of course it happened. But when I was writing that, I was reading about all the prisoner's dilemma experiments that they did at the Rand Corporation, back in the 50s and 60s, and they were trying to prove that people will save themselves at the expense of everybody else. That it's a famous situation, the prisoner's dilemma, where if you admit your guilt, then both prisoners will get a short sentence. But if you say the other guy did it, he'll get a long sentence and you'll get no crime. And they kept trying to recreate different versions of that with the employees at the Rand Corporation. And they would always take the altruistic path. They would always do the non-capitalist, non-selfish thing. And they kept dismissing those results, saying, well, it's because they were women, or because they knew each other, or there was something wrong with the experiment. But no, people in their more, and I hate to use a word like this, but in their more natural state, they really do the altruistic thing. They do want to enjoy other people.
And that's not just humans. That's not just Team Human.
Right.
This goes back 200 million years to when lactation began, because lactation required empathy. That's probably where mirror neurons came into play. And so this is something that any mammal has too. This is not something that you have to be a human to have. And
right.
There are some wonderful studies Frans de Waal did looking at monkeys who were given cucumbers or grapes in cages next to each other. And the monkey that was just given a grape got pissed after the monkey next to him only got a cucumber and threw the grape back at the researcher because it wasn't fair. And that's how deep this is within us. And it's just talks about how badly our technology and our economies have taken us.
Right. And I try not to blame the tech. Partly, I guess, because I'm still kind of a fan of the possibilities of technology. I think that's part of what humans do, is make tech the way that, bees make honey or beavers make dams. Humans can make tech. And it's part of our nature, if you will, from fire and caves to speech and text and all this stuff. It's cool and interesting. It's a way for human beings to shepherd nature. But when technology or language or anything is purely at the service of a 12th century economic operating system that was designed by a few monarchs to prevent people from creating and exchanging value, we end up in a really screwed up world. And and that's where we are today. And the fact that so many people are still unwilling to accept the fact that we are using an economic operating system, that even the folks who are making Bitcoin and whatever, they still are just reifying the existing rules of capitalism with new technology, rather than opening things up and saying, oh, wait a minute, we don't have to serve money. That money was invented to serve us. And what would it look like if we decided to program money and the rest of our society to promote human flourishing rather than to surrender human flourishing for the needs of a market?
Now, you refer to favor banks and sharing economies as well. Can you talk a little bit about them and where they fit into your picture?
Yeah, I mean, well, what you see in any area that can't get cash, whether it was, the heartland of America during the Depression or Greece during austerity today, what people quickly come to realize is that, well, if I have skills and you have needs, and you have skills and that person has needs, then we actually have the basis for an economy. The only thing we lack is a means of exchange, a way for me to get your skills and her to get her to, you to get her skills and her to get my skills. Well, then all we need is a way of keeping track of who's doing what for whom, so that, so that it feels equal. So there's things called favor banks, which is really just a website, where you list what you know how to do and you list what things you need and you give and get credits. So you might decide in a system, okay, everybody starts with 10 credits. And then you spend credits in order to get services, and you get credits when you give services, and it works out. And then communities find out that, wow, it seems 70, 80% of our needs we can just get from our own community. And that last little bit, that last 10 or 20% that we want to try to get an automobile or an iPhone or something like that, well, then our community has to figure out a way to create something that people in other communities want. And that's when a community decides, okay, we can start a small factory that makes this, or we could create a publishing company. We can make candles. It's what you see, the kibbutzes used to do in Israel. Each one would come up with something that they could then sell as a community for the things that they couldn't just generate within their communities. And there's an economic model. It's called anarcho-syndicalism, which sort of which promotes that, and the Catholic Church promoted it. They called it distributism. It was a financial model that said that no business really needs to grow bigger than, or should grow bigger than it has to, than to do what it does. You don't grow for growth's sake, which is just serving some investor who may not even have been needed in the first place, but you grow as big as you need to serve the market that you're in, and then that's it. And then you sustain at that level. And if you haven't borrowed a ton of money, you don't need to grow any bigger than that. And the funny thing is today, Wall Street and Silicon Valley, they call that bootstrapping, as if it's some weird magical thing. Bootstrapping is what a mythical character Baron von Munchausen used to do. They said he could lift himself up by his own bootstraps, as if you could defy gravity and pick yourself up. So a business that operates by taking its own profits and reinvesting them in the company, that's considered a weird, magical, new age fantasy. And that's business. That's basic business. That's the way my grandfather started his textile company. You sell something, you have a profit, you eat off some of the profit, and you take the rest of it and invest it in more merchandise. That's normal business. And I think people are rediscovering the very basics of business. And they won't teach you this at Harvard Business School, but the idea is you provide a good or a service for somebody else, and you charge them a little bit more than it costs you to make it, and that little bit more is your profit. And then you can live off that or invest it in the business. And I know it sounds insane, but this is the way businesses could actually work.
Okay, so we need to do another break, and then I'd like you to talk about the Renaissance and individuals and capitalism and individualism. So this break time. And you're listening to the Rob Call Bottom Up show. My guest for this show is Douglas Rushkoff, a media theorist, writer, columnist, lecturer, and graphic novelist who has a new book out, The Team Human. So you have an interesting take on how the Renaissance changed thinking about individualism.
Yeah, it's interesting. When I studied this when I was like an English major in college, but it didn't really sink in. But my English teachers were trying to tell me how Dr. Faustus, which was this Renaissance era play, they kept saying Dr. Faustus was the first individual, the first true individual in literature. And I didn't fully understand what they meant until I started studying the Renaissance itself. And it turns out the Renaissance is when the notion of the individual was really born, or at least retrieved from ancient Greece. In ancient Greece, they had sort of individual Greek heroes and Oedipus and all, but that was lost for, the next, the next 1,000 years. They didn't think of people as individuals. Everybody belonged to their community. If you even ask somebody, what, the word home didn't mean the dwelling that they lived in. Their home was the town or city that they lived in. So people thought of themselves as part of these larger groups. And it was in the Renaissance that we got the, remember the Vitruvian Man, that it's that picture of the guy who's like got in the circle, that great Renaissance image of the person with his arms out and as an Da Vinci. That is that's the sort of the new understanding of what it means to be a human, is this individual, the Vitruvian Man. Perspective painting was all about, there's an individual point of view. You had to have there was a place from which you looked at a perspective painting. So everything really focused down onto the individual. And even the inventions of capitalism had to do with everything that you got was something that someone else lost. There was the two-ledger accounting, that every credit was a debit. So it was, everything became zero sum. It's mine and yours, or mine or yours. There was no collective sensibility. And that's what led, in some ways, to great things like the Enlightenment and one man, one vote and individual rights and the private citizen and private property. But what we lost was the commons. We lost the collective. We lost our understanding of collective benefit as we each went about, like Dr. Faustus, trying to collect everything for ourselves and having personal, individual salvation. Even, Protestantism compared to Catholicism was so much about, my salvation, my personal relationship to God. And that's, me reading my Bible alone, as opposed, and it's great. I got to have my own interpretation of it, but I lose that sense of collective. I could lose that sense of community. I
want to get into the collective, but before that, let's take this individualism to the extreme with Ayn Rand and her message.
Right. Well, I mean, her message, which, even Alan Greenspan was a big fan of, is that, it's funny. They asked, I just read about this. They asked Ayn Rand if she, what she thought about life after death. And she said, well, I don't die. Everyone else will die. So it's an interesting way of understanding death, that death is when everybody else goes away. And it's this understanding that, as Margaret Thatcher argued, there's no such thing as society, that there's only the individuals, and all of these individuals, each pursuing their own benefit, somehow magically yields society through what Hungarian economist Hayek called catalaxy. It was as if each individual is somehow a rational actor going after what's best for them individually, and that this creates a market that distributes things appropriately to everybody. But that's not the way it works. We're not individuals each going rationally after what matters for us. We are collective beings going after what benefits the group. And we somehow are calling that like socialism, like it's this bad thing. You don't even have to look at it as socialism. It's not about redistributing the spoils of capitalism after the fact. It's about pre-distributing the means of production before the fact. It's that we all own this world, that our resources are a commons, and we can all individually and collectively utilize them to our mutual benefit. We don't have to think of this as a race against the others. It's not, it's not even fun to think of it that way, but it's not efficient at all.
Well, and you basically raised what was going to be my next question, and because you talk a lot about collectivism, and yet it's almost like there's a knee-jerk reaction from conservatives when the idea of collectivism is raised. They go socialism, socialism, communism.
Right.
And you I mean, I jotted down. You say that in today's world we have distributed economy, blockchain, open source, but it always seems to get back to socialism, and socialism is reviled. And yet I'm with you. I think that this idea of a collective people, us being a part of a collective, that's the way humans evolved. That's I in my book I characterize it as a bottom-up way of seeing and being aware of our interdependence, our connectedness, our caring about each other and about the environment. And yet, how do we get past this knee-jerk reaction that takes anything along those lines and describes it as socialism? And
well, the knee-jerk reaction was funded. You know, if you look at the funding of the economics programs of American universities from the 1920s until today, there was a conscious effort. There's some great books. There's one called The Science of Coercion that looks at this. There was a conscious effort by the largest industrialists, particularly after Franklin Delano Roosevelt was really reviled by big business because he did all these things like the WPA and all of these very collectivist things to get us out of the Depression. They said, we're going to have to somehow counteract this spirit of collectivism in America, or we're going to lose our monopolies. We're going to lose everything. So they paid for really all of the economics programs in America. Everybody, Harvard and Columbia and NYU and Chicago, they paid to put in chaired professorships for industrialists, for free market radicals to become the main professors at economics universities and to take away funding from anybody who was promoting any other kind of model. And then we got the Cold War with Russia, which really helped them fund this, because then what they were saying was, well, any kind of collectivist economic solutions, anything that dealt with sharing, must be Soviet. And the Soviets, of course, were the enemies. They had the atomic bomb. And so it all became mixed up in the same thing. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt's welfare programs and Social Security and things like that became equated with Stalin and Khrushchev and Sputnik and and atomic bombs. And it's still they're still kind of married, even in the academy. And certainly in business, and it's just ingrained, it's programmed. Anyone who went to business school was taught that the stuff that we're talking about is Soviet communism or Chairman Mao. And it's not. Medicare, Social Security, public school. These are great things, not bad things. We shouldn't get rid of public school in America. It's great for all American children to be able to be educated, yes, on the public dollar. These are good things. They are not going to lead to the Soviet Union invading America. And once people understand that, it's a long road. I've been at town meetings in my little blue state town where, when we're having talks about the school budget, people get up and actually say this. They get up and say, I don't understand why, if I don't have a school-age kid, I should be paying the school tax. They actually say that. And I realize that because there's no basic understanding of physics. And what I had to say to that person afterwards. Of course, I wasn't going to do this publicly because it's not about offending somebody, but to say, you understand, the question you asked is the same as me saying, why should I be paying into Social Security if it's going to you and I'm not an old person? You know, because they've lost the basic understanding of physics, or of physics too, but of civics. And that's what happens, unfortunately, if you really kind of watch Fox News for too long, as a lot of people do, you lose sight of the basic principles on which, you know, a nation like this are founded, the basic civics through which a society operates.
What do you mean? Talk about that a little bit more. Because one of my other questions was, where do politics and ideologies fit into team human thinking?
Well, I mean, I think the most important thing is to get off ideology whenever possible. You know, ideologies are really were invented as a way of programming people's behavior. So you have this ideology up there that you could believe in, and that kind of keeps your attention off the ground, off the other people, off what is actually going on. You know, our ism is better than your ism, and that's it. So your fascism, we're, you know, federalism, or your republicanism, and we're this ism. And it really prevents people from seeing what is our common ground. So, you know, what I've been asking people to do politically, and maybe this is the least popular part of what I've been saying, is to see the human being in the supposed adversary. You know, to look at that kid wearing the Make America Great Again hat, facing off with the Native American, and see the human being rather than dehumanizing him. You know, if you can't see the human being under the MAGA hat, then how do you expect the person in the MAGA hat to see the human being in the Mexican on the other side of the fence? You know, and it starts with that these are humans, they're just like us.
And wrote that down, by the way. I love what you're saying there. It's so important. We have to get past that. And you know, in writing my book, Bottom Up, I thought of it as a kind of a lefty liberal kind of a thing. And then I ended up with a publisher who went to the first Tea Party protest. And I had to really rethink. And really, Team Human isn't about politics. Bottom Up isn't about politics. These are messages about how we're all connected together, how we need each other. And that can be a conservative value just as well as it can be a progressive value. And I think that that's such an important thing to start thinking about. It goes beyond politics.
It does. I mean, and the progressive side is just as guilty of this as the conservative side. You know, the progressive side is now in this situation where if you're only up to last week's progressive agenda, then you become the enemy of this week's progressive agenda. You know, how can any of us want to promote progress if we know that there's video of us being a progressive in 1996, which is incompatible with progressivism in 2020 because we've progressed, you know? So
I just want to keep going with, I've got 3 pages of notes here, and I barely got off of the first page. You have a line I love. You say, there's a thing, fractal sensibility. The key to experiencing one's individuality is to perceive the way it is reflected in the whole, and in turn resonate with something greater than oneself. That's a great line. I love that.
Oh, well, thanks. And that's, you know, it's the kind of the new, that's the sensibility of what I'm hoping is the new renaissance that we're moving into, you know, that we start understanding that, you know, as above, so below, that in our, you know, kind of microcosmic daily interactions, we are reflecting and can reflect back the way the whole system operates. You know, if you act intolerant of others in your daily moment-to-moment life, then you can't really talk so much about, you know, the president being intolerant of some other group or country. You know, that we have to we have to, like Obama used to talk about, we have to be the change that we're talking about. And you can do that locally. You don't have to do it on some website for the whole world to see. You can interact with people differently in your daily life. And it starts with the people you like, but then you got to move it on to the people you don't, the people who seem so different from you, and engage with them as if they were human beings too, because they are.
And you talk near the end of the book in terms of how to make Team Human happen. You talk about how it's a local thing.
Well, it is. I mean, because human beings are scaled locally. I'm local. I am, no matter how many extensions I have, I exist right here and now. And your local reality, even if you do great national or international work, your local reality, meaning the other human beings that are around you at any given time, they are the way that you can calibrate. They're the way that you can restore yourself to sort of basic health and coherence without other actual human organisms in your daily experience. It's really hard to bring anything to the world.
And we've got to wrap. So you've got a Team Human project now, and tell us a little bit about the work you're doing and how people can connect with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm doing a podcast. I just reduced its frequency from weekly to every other week because people need time to actually digest these things. There's so much out there, so much coming at people, that I thought it's kind of a gift to give less rather than more. But yeah, I mean, I've got the book Team Human, which I've kept as cheap as possible. Got the Team Human podcast. You can go and see at teamhuman.fm. You can join, you can support it and subscribe if you want, or just listen to it and enact it. And that's what I do. I'm teaching at CUNY, a public university. You can come. There's a new master's program I helped start called Media Studies and Social Change, where we're looking at a lot of these kinds of issues. I mean, and here I am. I mean, I'm getting worse at answering email because a lot comes in. But there's others. Find the others where you are. It's not about connecting to
That's
me.
the end of the last words of the book. Find the others. And you've been listening to Douglas Rushkoff, the author of Team Human, and you've been listening to the Rob Call Bottom Up Show. Thanks so much.
Thank you.